10 years ago, my mother had devastating news. Her cancer had renewed, and she only would have for maybe 1 or 2 years to live. And she didn't let that discourage her, but she instead decided to prove the doctors wrong. And she started finding alternative ways to treat herself. And eventually she died 5 years after. But in those 5 years, I think she lived more than most of us live in a lifetime. She had a strong purpose to fight her cancer. And even though the doctors couldn't help, she decided to find her own way. And she stopped caring what other people thought of her and started to live as a whole human being. And after her death, I started wondering how much energy and drive and life she had, even in the middle of this illness. And I came to this conclusion that I also wanted to live life as fully as possible, and I wanted to enable that for others as well. And since I was an entrepreneur, I wanted to enrich people's lives by making the workplace fulfilling for all of us, or for all of our employees. And I became a student, trying to read every book about how to build better organizations while I was building my own companies. And this I know, when we have a strong purpose and when we have autonomy over our own doings, and when we embrace ourselves and others as whole human beings, we gain so much energy that we can do things that many of us wouldn't even dare to dream. And that's why I'm wondering why our corporations mostly and organizations are constraining this energy, which of course, if would be directed to work, would bring extraordinary, unbelievable results. And that's why I'm so grateful for Fortum to have realized this possibility and for enabling this event, and also the Teal Suomi community who share the same passion to make work fulfilling for all of us. Peter Drucker is the most influential person on earth who have ever lived in the management thinking today. And he has said that the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And we know that our corporation's logic and our organizational logic has shifted many times before. We know this from history and research. And usually this shift happens when the complexity of the world and the surroundings become so big that the previous paradigm or the previous logic doesn't work anymore. So what if it is that the problems of today's corporations in this more complex world is because we are acting with yesterday's logic? And indeed, there are some research and also some proof that there are companies emerging that are running with totally different kind of logics, and they seem to thrive and flourish in this more complex world and get really good results. And these are the kind of companies and this kind of paradigm that we will be talking about today. And I would like to introduce you to this paradigm with a story about this Dutch neighborhood nursing company called Burchak. And since 19th century in Holland, there has been this system where they have had these neighborhoods, and every neighborhood has had their own nurse, which would go to the homes of people, of the sick people and older people, to take care for them. And somewhere in the 80s or 90s, the health insurance system of Netherlands came up with this logical idea. Let's put these nurses and group them into large organizations so we can get some economies of scale. And so the small companies began to merge, and they became even bigger companies, and this kind of optimizing efficiency logic took over. And they started hiring managers and middle managers and planners to make the schedules for the nurses, and also to optimize the routes for the nurses. And they took off their phones from the nurses so they could focus on their work and put up these big call centers to do the customer interaction. And also the nurses started to specialize. There was these cheap nurses who would do the normal tasks, and only the more expensive nurses who were more specialized were used only when needed. And someone realized that, hey, some nurses are doing faster these tasks than others, so let's establish these time frames. That, for example, they said that they established this system where, for example, bathing could only take 15 minutes and would take 10 minutes to do the injection and so on. And indeed, the efficiency of the system got better. But was the system really for good? If your father, maybe 80 years old, would have been then there, and he had this maybe some illness that prevented him from doing the normal tasks, and you would have asked him how did he feel about this, and we know that he would have answered something like this, that he feels extremely stressed. Every day a new nurse comes to my house, and I have to share him or her my private information and my medical history, and she even parts me, so she sees me naked. And also when he or she don't even have time to ask me how I've been. And so they also made some mistakes while treating these patients, because they didn't have time or they didn't know these patients so well, and there were some unnecessary hospital visits and also probably some unnecessary deaths. And in 2006 there was this nurse called Just a Block, who also had enough. And these nurses, they hated the system, and they started leaving nursing. They started finding other jobs because they felt that they could not do their job well, and which was their vacation really often. And this Just a Block also felt this way, and he quit his job. But he didn't try to find another type of employment, but instead he decided to form this company called Burchard with 3 other colleagues. And he thought that there has to be some more point to all this than to optimize these taxpayers' money. But he thought that the purpose of the company should be to help the patients live healthy and autonomous lives especially the older people, so they could live their rest of their lives or at least as long as possible in their homes instead of some facilities or hospitals. And secondly, he thought that the nurses should be trusted to do the work well, and he believed that the nurses are the best people to know how to do best their work. So and much better than some managers. So he decided that there will be no managers in Burchard. And also he trusted the nurses to fulfill the company's purpose. And also he thought that we have to stop treating these patients like objects. We have to start seeing them as full, whole human beings with their other needs also than medical ones. And the results of this have been staggering. First of all, Burchard uses 35% less time per patient than the previous system. This is according to Ernst & Young study. And their patients go to hospitals 30% less, and they use doctor's time 40% less. And I know there might be someone thinking that, okay, this is nice, but we're a big corporation. We have thousands of people, and they need to be managed. Well, since its initiation in 2006, the Burchard, according to the same study done by Ernst & Young, they had saved from the Dutch medical bill over 2 billion euros. They also have 10,000 employees. And do you know any other company that has grown from 4 to 10,000 in 10 years? And they have 80% market share of home care in Netherlands. And they're still growing even in Netherlands, and they're also growing abroad, for example in the United States. So these are the kinds of companies where we are talking about, and this kind of way of, this logic of running organizations when we talk about these Teal organizations. And there are of course many organizations that are coming from that are not nursing. There are, for example, this French chair manufacturer called Fabi, and they have 500 people, and they do these car chair boxes. And they are the only car gearbox manufacturer that has facilities in Europe. Every other, their competitor has gone to abroad, China or somewhere else. And also, there was this energy company called AES, who had a very similar company, I would guess, than Fortum. And they had 27,000 people. And they were extremely successful running this kind of self-organizing principles and this kind of way of, this kind of logic. Unfortunately, their CEO retired and then was replaced by other one who went back to this old kind of way of thinking, but also the results, you can see that from the results, they were not so good after that. And also we have these Nordic this kind of companies. We have our, for example, I would say that Reactor is doing something very similar to this. But these companies, they differ in our current companies in 3 major ways. The first breakthrough of this new kind of logic is self-management. In Burchard, for example, they work as teams of 10 to 12 nurses who have all the power and all the decision-making power to do. They do all their own decisions. For example, they do their own recruiting, they do their own finances, they do set even their own salaries. And of course, this kind of way of organizing needs different kind of processes. So they have reinvented these corporation processes, and many of these kind of organizations also have this new kind of decision-making processes. For example, some have this kind of advice process where you have to seek advice from colleagues and experts before making a decision. And they also have, because they have no bosses, they have this conflict handling process, because there are no bosses to handle these conflicts. And there are several implications to this. First of all, as I guess this is what the Fortum is mostly concerned, at least, that these corporations and companies are extremely agile. They don't need to go through the hierarchy to make a decision, but they can sense and respond right away to the client's needs, for example. The decision can be made there and then, because the employee has all the information available to him, all the same information as the CEO. And also think about the motivation that these people have who work in these companies. We often think about that, and we are fond of this idea of economies of scale. But we fail to see, because it's so hard to see, these economies of motivation, which are usually greater than the economies of scale. And think about if you could do your work the way you think is the best way to do it, and not to do it in a way that some stupid boss thinks it's the way it should be done. And also, there is no one to blame in these companies. You cannot blame your boss, because there is no boss. I know that there is, in your heads, there are sometimes going as well as in mine, this self-talk that says that, well, I could have done this better if that, or my boss would have done something, or my wife, or my husband. But these corporations don't have so much of this self-talk. And if you think your salary is too low, then you can raise it. There's no blaming of salary. But of course, if you raise it too high and you don't ask anyone their opinion, maybe they don't like it so much, so maybe you get in a trouble. But basically, yes. The second breakthrough of these organizations is something called wholeness. In Burjorg, it meant that the clients, the patients, were treated as whole human beings. And in the previous system there was these time slots. But now the Burjorg nurses, they go to the client, the patient, and they sit to have a cup of coffee. And they have no hurry. They ask the patient or the client that how you've been, and they chat all sorts of things. And because the problems, in this instance, the medical problems are the root causes are not often medical ones, but it just might be that the old lady is lonely. But also in these organizations, it's encouraged that people show up at work not only with their professional sides. They also show up, they can show their masculine sides as well as feminine sides. And today we emphasize this rationality, but we of course have also emotions, intuition side in us, and also maybe spiritual sides of us. And this is encouraged, and some corporations go even so far in organizations that they have processes for this as well. So they make sure that people show up as whole. And the third breakthrough, or before I go to that, think about how much energy would you have in your work if you could come to your workplace without this self-observation going on, that you think that that you have to think that what can I say, or what can I do, or what can I wear? What kind of results would you get if you didn't have this energy waster in you? The third breakthrough is evolutionary purpose. This means that these corporations, companies, organizations usually have a purpose that goes beyond their self-interests. And usually this purpose is guiding the decisions in the companies. And not so much, for example, values or guidelines, or definitely the boss is not guiding so much as this purpose. And for example, in Burchard, their evolutionary purpose is to help patients live healthy and autonomous lives. And they really do walk their talk. They, for example, if they find out the old lady is lonely, then they might help her to do these social networks, for example, with other clients, other patients. And also, they might call their families and ask them to see them. And the point of this is also that the Burchard is not needed so much anymore. They might visit the patient more, not so often, maybe once a week or twice a week, but so that he could manage more on his own. And they go even further than that. They even help their competitors to run these kind of principles, and they do it completely for free. Because they don't believe in this competition, because they more believe that in this purpose, and other companies also believe in their purpose more than competition. So think about the implications, what this would have if Fortum or other Nordic corporations would go in these directions. Think about the implications in your work as an employee of these organizations. Think about the implications for the customers or for the investors. I am not only feeling that this change is necessary, but I feel that this really will be happening. And we are not only getting better organizations while going this direction, but we also are getting a better world for all of us to live. Thank you.